So I'm going to be commenting on Vivek Ramaswamy versus mentally ill TDS suffering Jim Acosta of CNN. And I want to point out that although I did see a portion of this video the other day, when I looked for it on the CNN YouTube page, they did not have the first portion of the video there. And it's for good reason. And it's because Vivek completely destroys Jim Acosta, and he looks visibly angry. And I'm going to highlight that part. I just want to mention the fact that when the narrative does not fit the interests of the mainstream corporate press, that they often edit that part out the same way that they edit out the context in stories to give it the direction for the mind of the viewer that they desire. This is just another example of it. Okay, here we go.
On-camera reaction to the Georgia indictment as a warning to his party.
Disgraceful thing. And Republicans can't let them get away with it. The Republicans have to be tough. The Republicans are great in many ways, but they don't fight as hard for this stuff, and they have to get a lot tougher. And if they don't, they're not going to have much of a Republican Party.
Well, they haven't been very tough on Donald Trump. And one of the Republicans who is defending Trump is Vivek Ramaswamy. And today, a memo from Ron DeSantis' super PAC laid out some advice for the Florida governor ahead of next week's debate. Among the suggestions, defend Donald Trump, but, quote, take a sledgehammer to Ramaswamy. And joining me now is the candidate mentioned in that memo, Vivek Ramaswamy. He's giving a speech at the Nixon Library tonight. Welcome, Mr. Ramaswamy. Appreciate you joining us.
It's good to see you, Jim. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, let's get right to this. A pro-DeSantis super PAC, I'm sure you've seen this, has posted documents online that show DeSantis' upcoming debate strategy, and that includes not only attacks on President Biden as well as media, but instructions to, quote, hammer Ramaswamy. Are you preparing to be hammered?
You know, I have been prepared for that for a lot of my life, and I'm prepared to take that on. The truth is I'm an outsider in this race, and I think that is threatening a lot of the professional politicians, understandably. A guy like me is not supposed to be in this race, according to their book. I'm approaching my debate strategy a little bit differently. I think many times if you don't have a message, you look to attack other candidates. I'm preferring to stand for my own message, asking the question, what are we running to? And I think if we're guided by that purpose, the attacks from the other candidates are not going to stop me.
I absolutely just want to break in here and state that what he's saying resonates with me and many other voters, because we've seen nonstop partisan attacks and that the other candidate is a bad person. I think that Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, does a lot less of this than others, but Vivek is definitely correct here in his approach, and it will catalyze people because it makes them stand out against those that merely attack.
And the latest Fox polling shows you've gained ground, more ground since June than any other candidate. Why are you gaining ground while candidates like Ron DeSantis are struggling to catch on?
I think the reality is I'm unconstrained in speaking the truth. There are many forces at work in both political parties, in the establishment of the Democrat Party and the Republican Party alike, that constrains what candidates can actually say. A lot of that comes from the donor class. In the Republican Party, you have a lot of super PAC puppets. I'm not one of them. I am a patriot who speaks the truth. I am independent. I am putting my own money into this campaign precisely to avoid taking a tin can with a hat in hand, asking a bunch of donors for permission to run. And I think that's a very different model from many of the other professional politicians in this race. And the good news is voters across our country, in our base, they can tell the difference between somebody who's actually sharing their own convictions versus somebody who's parroting off talking points served up to them 15 minutes or 15 days before a debate. I think the reality is also the message of my campaign is resonating. Shut down the administrative state. Declare independence from China. Grow the economy. Revive national pride. Revive our national identity itself. We as conservatives, we can't just be complacent with criticizing the radical Biden agenda. That's boring. It's trite at a certain point in time. We have to stand for a vision of our own. And I think I'm the only candidate who's actually offering that. I think that's a big part of why we've been successful.
Well, you've got a big test coming up with next week's debate, and 8 candidates, including yourself, have met the donor and polling threshold for that debate. You've signed the loyalty pledge. Former President Donald Trump has refused to sign the pledge. Are you okay with Trump getting special treatment? Shouldn't he have to play by the rules?
I don't understand what the special treatment that Jim Acosta is talking about. Again, if you notice the framing, it's always anti-Trump. So that's the frame that you must see the political landscape through. That Trump, it gets the special treatment, despite the fact that he's being investigated 4 times over in what is clearly a political witch hunt. Okay.
I expect Trump to be on that debate stage later this fall, and I expect him to play by the same set of rules of everybody else, but I am fine with him missing the first couple of debates. He's been on that debate stage many times over. Heck, he was president for 4 years. For me, this is an opportunity to introduce myself to the country. I'm looking forward to that. Many people don't yet know who I am, or don't really know certainly very well who I am. And so that's the opportunity I'm looking forward to. I do expect President Trump to show up down the line, but I think it's fair game for him to miss the first couple.
What if he doesn't sign that pledge, just refuses to sign it? Does he get a pass on that?
Well, look, I think if that's a condition to make the debate stage, then I think he's going to sign that pledge to make the debate stage. But the reality is, I believe he's waiting, based on his public comments at least, it seems like he's waiting for a smaller field. So I look forward to being on that debate stage with him. But for now, I'm focused on the path to next Wednesday. I'm in 8 states in the period heading up to between now and the debate stage. But I'm looking forward to introducing myself to the people of this country and hopefully drawing some important policy contrasts from the rest of the field. I think this is an important moment for the GOP to stop obsessing over the who. There's been so much obsession over Donald Trump or somebody else. Forget the who for a second. Let's first focus on who we are, but what do we stand for and why we stand for it. That's a discussion we actually haven't had in the GOP for a very long time. And I think this debate stage is actually going to be good for the evolution of our party, really defining our agenda rather than devolving into biographical brawls, even though certain other candidates say Ron DeSantis and his super PAC want him to go the direction of the biographical brawl. I prefer to go in the direction of substance, answering what we stand for and why. That's what's
the only thing that I find at all distasteful about Vivek's approach is that he is constantly criticizing Ron DeSantis in the race for second place. Maybe it's justified. I don't really think so necessarily, but it is something that I do note. And even though I'm a huge Vivek fan, obviously, it's definitely something that draws my attention and piques my interest as to why. And I think that the reasons in this case are likely political, but I don't know that for sure. But regardless, still a huge fan. Here we go.
going to make our party stronger.
Well, I think the former president is going to come up at the debate, whether he's there or not, and he's now facing his 4th criminal indictment, this time in Georgia on forgery, false statements, election fraud, and racketeering charges. You have said that these are political or politicized prosecutions, politicized persecutions through prosecution. Let's listen to what his former attorney general is saying about this.
People who defend him say that he genuinely did feel that he was robbed, and this was the good fight and the proper fight.
Well, even if he did, and I am dubious about that, but even if he believed that, that doesn't mean you can use illegal means to rectify it. If you think the bank is unfairly keeping your money, there are many things you can do to get it back. You can't go and rob the bank.
What's your response to the former attorney general?
First of all, that is a false equivalency. Donald Trump did everything within the law. He did not go rob the bank. So I completely disagree with Barr's equation there with his equivalency. It's a false one.
Look, I think there are deep legal flaws with this case. I'm talking to you from the Nixon Presidential Library, where I'm delivering a speech later tonight. We'll look at Nixon versus Fitzgerald. This is something that the press has altogether ignored. A president's acts while in office are something that he actually enjoys immunity for, other than through the impeachment process. So if he believes, even incorrectly, that he was looking after election fraud, that alone could be a defense. I also think there are deep due process failures. Let's start with the fact that they actually, Fulton County, publicly posted the charges of the indictment even before the grand jury had signed them. That's a grave prosecutorial, bushy-tailed, overexcited mistake.
Yes, it absolutely is. And all it proves is that it's just political, that they have everything in place in the machinery and they know the outcome before the grand jury finishes convening. and thus they publish it. It is a due process violation. It is, and it just shows you the political nature of it. It's frankly disgusting. I think that everybody could see that.
That's a due process violation that itself could be grounds for a motion to dismiss. We also have to look at this prosecution in the context of the fact that there are 3 others, now 4 prosecutions in a series of months, all convening around a presidential election that sets a god-awful precedent, Jim, for this country. We do not want to become a nation where the party in power uses multiple different legal cases at the same time, pushing untested novel legal theories to knock out its opposition in the middle of a presidential election. That is not how we do things in the United States of America. And I say this as somebody who in many national polls is now polling second. It would be easier for me if Donald Trump were eliminated from competition. That is not how I want to win. I stand on the side of principle, not politics.
There are now 4 different
when I say
indictments.
We need to unite this country.
Yeah, let me jump in. There have been 4 different indictments. You don't think he's committed any crimes in any of these indictments?
I don't think any of the indictments have demonstrated that he committed a crime. No. And I've written on the pages of the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere wearing a technical legal hat. And you and I can go into that detail if you're
refusing
interested.
to return
but
classified documents.
Clearly politically motivated.
Is this about Vivek or is this about Trump? Because the only thing that CNN is doing repeatedly is attacking Trump in whatever means, whatever avenue they have at their availability. And in this case, it's through Vivek. They're just pressing the case against Trump. And it just kind of is sickening to me because everything that Vivek is saying here is correct. And yes, it would be easier for him, much easier, if Trump was out of the picture. But he stands on principle, which is something that we have not seen in 95% of politicians, with the exception of like a Rand Paul or a Thomas Massey. Those guys stand on principle. Who else does? Very few. Definitely not anybody that would come from CNN. They have zero principle.
Well, let's just take that one as an example. That indictment made zero mention of the Presidential Records Act, the most recently passed act that relates to a president, including an outgoing president's access to documents. The fact that this is a 49-page indictment, that was silent on that fact, reveals smacks of politicization. I also think that the fact that they use the Espionage Act, one of the most un-American acts in U.S. history, that has been used to round up anti-war activists, that was used to lock up Eugene V. Debs when he ran for president.
But do you think it's okay to have classified documents? You think it's okay for you to have classified documents laying around the Ramaswamy household?
Do you think it's okay for you to have classified documents lying around the Ramaswamy household? Is that not a huge straw man? Like, he thinks that Vivek thinks it's okay for him to have classified documents. He's arguing about the fact that President Trump had the ability to declassify anything that he desired because the president has ultimate decision power over the executive branch. And that's why anything that he decides to declassify is automatically declassified. This is such a straw man and a horrible question by Acosta. Just wanted to bring that to your attention.
No, it's not. But I think that there's a difference between a bad judgment and a crime. And the Presidential Records Act expressly gives the U.S. president access to those records.
And he didn't return them. They asked for the documents back.
Again, I would have made very different judgments.
Yeah.
Look, Jim, I am running in the same race that Donald Trump is. So I'm not saying that every judgment he made was the same judgment I would make. In fact, it wasn't. But that is different from charging it as a crime, which I think sets an awful precedent in our country. If you want to get a little technical
about it, Jim,
in the federal election
case, he lied about the election. He tried to overturn the election results. Why not call him out for that as well?
I will remind you the Supreme Court's precedent in Alvarez, a 2012 case, which held that public officials, including politicians, have a First Amendment right to lie, to tell the truth, to even make statements they didn't believe, let alone the fact that there isn't a shred of evidence to suggest that Trump didn't even believe his own claims. And so we can get into the...
You see, if you don't think that Trump truly believed that the election was stolen, then you haven't seen Trump operate over the years. Regardless of anything, the guy has a huge ego, and it is well within the confines of his personality to believe this, to press this, even if other people tell him differently. And a lot of people were telling him, yes, there was fraud in the election. So yes, he did believe it. And so you want to take somebody out for their personal beliefs while allowing Hillary Clinton to repeatedly state that Donald Trump was an illegitimate president.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows. And so I know that he knows that this wasn't on the level. I don't know that we'll ever know everything that happened, but clearly we know a lot and are learning more every day, and history will probably sort it all out. So of course he's obsessed with me.
Or for the Democrats to question every election since 2000, 2004, 2008, 2016, and 2018, when Stacey Abrams still refuses to admit that she lost, still claims that there was election fraud. The hypocrisy and double standard don't matter to the Democrats because they don't care. They simply don't care. And everybody else has to play the game according to their rules. But when the outcome goes against them, they get to overturn them and then conveniently make the public forget about what they've done.
Legal technical details all we want. That's going to happen in the courtroom. But as a matter of judgment, as somebody who is running to and expects to be the next president of the United States, my top job is to reunite this country. And my way of doing that is going to be to pardon Donald Trump on day one and to pardon really anybody else who was also the victim of a politically motivated persecution through prosecution.
Did you see Jim Acosta right there? He bit down on his lip. His eyes came down and together. I mean, I'm just pointing out the fact that he cannot hide his emotions. The guy does not have a great poker face.
We have to move forward as a country. And I think this sets a dangerous precedent unless we actually pardon.
But Mr. Ramaswamy, you just said you want to wait for all the details, the technical details to come out at trial, but you're declaring beforehand that you would pardon him. Why not listen for the facts to come out at trial and then make that determination?
I'm saying it based on one assumption. The assumption is that the statements in each of the indictments are the most prosecution favorable statements we're going to get. Any legal scholar would tell you that is a fair assumption. In any case, the prosecution always puts up its strongest foot in the indictment itself. We haven't even heard from the defense. So yes, if there are gaping surprises that come up, I mean, there's zero evidence to suggest that Trump was selling those secrets to foreign adversaries for private gain. But if those facts come up, of course, I would revisit my judgment. But the fact of the matter is the prosecution obviously makes the most aggressive statement of its case in the indictment. And assuming that's the case here, as it is in any other case, I will absolutely pardon Trump on day one, January 20th, 2025, when I'm in office.
Would you pardon Trump's other alleged co-conspirators in both the documents and the election cases?
It depends on how the facts match up to the law. I mean, you take about the documents case. There are special features of the law that apply to a U.S. president. Literally, the Presidential Records Act treats past U.S. presidents.
But why say you would pardon Trump on day one, but not? But why say you're going to pardon Trump on day one, but not make that kind of blanket promise to the alleged co-conspirators? Shouldn't they get that kind of same pardon offer?
I'm favorably inclined. I'm favorably inclined to do it. But right now, I'm a competitor against Donald Trump in this primary, and I want to be very clear on the side of principle. Though it's against my interest in this race, that's why I think in the interest of uniting this country, it is especially important to be clear about that fact. I expect to maybe making tens of pardons on day one. I think there are countless Americans who have been the victims of politically motivated persecutions through prosecution. Peaceful protesters on January 6th, January 6th defendants who actually have had constitutional due process violations. Julian Assange is someone I've specifically identified as somebody I would absolutely pardon. Ross Ulbricht, Douglas Mackey, others. But I think that the only way we're going to move forward as a country, there can be no reconciliation without truth. We have to put that past behind us. And my top job is going to be to heal the wounds of this nation, to lead us forward. Because even look at the conversation
pardoning Trump is going to heal the wounds. Pardoning Trump is going to heal the wounds.
Did you see right before that, again, Acosta is visibly angry and upset? I pointed out because this is what happens when you have TDS.
The nation?
I do. I do think it will be a step towards healing the wounds of the nation. I think there are deep wounds in this country that are the consequence of systematic censorship, the weaponization of police force to accomplish political goals through the justice system. That is wrong. This is not an easy project ahead for the next president. I am in this race because I do see a lot of candidates on both sides motivated by vengeance and grievance. I am motivated by leading this nation forward. And the way we're going to do it is by restoring one standard of the rule of law for all Americans, restore the integrity of the justice system, and leave politics to politics. The people of this country should decide who the next president is. They're free to take into account all of the information that has been laid out by left-wing media, right-wing media, et cetera, to make their decisions. If they didn't think Donald Trump made good decisions.
This is the winning pitch. What Vivek is stating right now, and I know I'm repeating myself from earlier, but it absolutely resonates with me. And therefore, I assume that it resonates with others out there that are tired of the division, and that Vivek has the opportunity and has stated his vision clearly to unite us once again by not seeking retribution and vengeance against those who wronged us. Yes, there will be some people that will be fired, that will face criminal probes if they in fact committed crimes, but not vengeance for vengeance sake. You have to respect it.
And they should take that into account when voting him out. But that is not the basis for a prosecution.
What about Trump making these threats and making these kinds of inflammatory comments about the judge, about the special counsel?
Again, they bring Vivek on to prosecute Trump. This should be an introduction of Vivek to the public and what he stands for. And it is because he's repeatedly stating that he wants to unite the nation. But Acosta is once again just prosecuting Trump to the public.
So on in some of these cases. Do you defend that? Should he knock that off?
So I'm not familiar with the specific nature of which inflammatory comment you're referring to or not. He's clearly deeply aggrieved by the fact that he's being prosecuted through 4 separate cases that have arisen at the same time in the middle of an election. Again, from my vantage point, I would make very different judgments and would have made very different judgments than Donald Trump. But that is a different point than saying this should be criminalized. That's where I'm at. So I'm not in this to defend
he says, I'm coming
Trump
after
or anybody
you if you're
else.
coming
I'm in this
after
to
me.
defend the nation.
But you've heard him say, you've heard how he said, I'm coming after you if you come after me. I mean, you've heard that, correct? Is that appropriate?
I mean, if he means that he's going to file a motion, if he means he's going to file a motion to dismiss, then he should absolutely file a motion to dismiss, which I think will be very embarrassing for the prosecutor and, frankly, very embarrassing for the entire law enforcement apparatus. If that's an ease granted.
But you don't think that's what he means when he says that?
I'm going to be very honest with you. I have not. You've clearly studied every word. Look, I'm going to be very honest with you, Jim. I have not read the specific tweet or social media post that you're referring to. I'm running for president. I'm looking at reviving our economy and declaring independence from China. I'm not parsing every social media post from every one of my other candidates. But broadly speaking, my whole point is there's a difference between a bad judgment and a crime. And the moment that we conflate
a lot of crimes
the
start
two,
with bad judgments.
that is the moment that we have a threat to liberty.
God, he is such an ass. Acosta is such an ass. Everything is about Trump. Everything, because that's how he made his money, by standing up to Trump. Oh, brave man. And I swear to God, it has seeped into his mind and ruined it. I am so tired of these TDS sufferers. They're insufferable people that can see no logic, to the contrary of their completely shrunken brains that happens when you have TDS.
You actually have to have committed a crime to be prosecuted for one. So making a very bad judgment as a politician, that's a basis for a voter to make a decision. But that's how we've got to do things in the United States of America. We have to let the people of this country decide who actually runs the country, not a federal administrative police state. And I just think that sets a dangerous and deeply problematic precedent in this country. And that is why I've been so vocal against it. That is why I'm clearly committed to pardoning Donald Trump if he is convicted.
But you said earlier you would wait for the facts to come out. If there are some big surprises, you may reconsider that.
Keep hanging on to those straws, Jim. Keep hanging on to those straws.
My assumption is that the worst statement of the facts, the most favorable version of the facts, is in the indictment. In 99.9% of legal cases, that's exactly how it works in the United States. And I said that on day one when I made my commitment that was my assumption.
Let's talk about China. You talked about China. You proposed to radio host Hugh Hewitt this week that the U.S. should help Taiwan deter a Chinese invasion until the U.S. has achieved, quote, semiconductor independence. Does it really serve our long-term interest to say we support territorial integrity until a country is no longer useful to us?
I think that moving from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity is actually a good thing for the United States to both advance our interests and to avoid war, as well as to be a more trusted partner. I don't think it's credible when we make hollow proclamations to defend democracy or to defend territorial sovereignty as a principle, when in fact we choose that principle selectively anyway. I think it's far more credible for us to be honest, to say that I will, as the next U.S. president, I stand for advancing American interests, period. That allows other nations to actually trust us. Just as we can trust them to follow their self-interest, they can trust us to follow ours.
But are you
Move
setting
from
a
this
signal
model
that
of
an allied...
neoconservatism or liberal hegemony?
But are you sending a signal that an allied democracy
Please.
could be taken over by another power just because they're no longer making something that we need?
Not an unfair question.
Well, let's get real, Jim. I mean, the fact of the matter is our current posture towards Taiwan is that the U.S. embraces the one China policy in the status quo. The standard protocol is a U.S. president isn't even supposed to pick up a phone call from the leader of Taiwan. In fact, when Trump did it, they laughed at him as though he was an outsider rube. And so the reality is that line of reasoning that somehow you're now going to call them an allied nation selectively to push back on my vision of strategic clarity is just a farce and betrays exactly what our current posture is in the first place. What I'm bringing to our foreign policy is honesty that will advance our interests. I'm moving from strategic ambiguity to be strategically very clear that we will defend Taiwan until we achieve semiconductor independence. I expect that to happen by the end of my first term, by 2028.
But then China
and
can have
that,
Taiwan?
Our commitments necessarily will change.
But then China can have
To be clear,
Taiwan?
after that, by being clear, not necessarily. What that really means is Taiwan, between now and then, can actually spend what it should be spending on national defense. Taiwan spends less than 2% of GDP on its military. That is shameful. Taiwan needs to be spending over 4% of its own GDP. But by being strategically clear, we give Taiwan a chance to build up its own defense capabilities. And China will also know that it is absolutely not in China's interest, not any rational actor in China would want to make that move before 2028. In the meantime, what am I going to do? Achieve.
So what he's done here is he's essentially taken off China, who has a long-term strategy in play and wants Taiwan desperately. It is Xi's overarching goal to unite, as he would say, Taiwan and China. But at least Vivek has diminished entirely the prospects until after 2028 of a world war with China going after Taiwan. After 2028, he can decide, he can make another decision about this. But during that time, there's zero chance that China's going to invade Taiwan. However, to give credit to Jim Acosta, I think that his questions are completely fair here.
Semiconductor independence for our nation and also build up our own homeland defense capabilities. That's something that's badly lacking. Super EMP defenses, cyber defenses, nuclear missile defenses. But if we're at that point by 2028, along with semiconductor independent, then no, I don't expect to want to send our sons and daughters in this country to die to fight over somebody else's territorial dispute. And I think that that's exactly what this Chinese Civil War dating back to 1949 was all about. There are two reasons why China might go after Taiwan. One is to lord over an economic gun over the United States. I refuse to let that happen. But a second is sorting out business dating back to 1949 between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong. That's not something that I'm going to send our sons and daughters to settle.
And you've also suggested that Vladimir Putin be allowed to keep parts of Ukraine as part of a way to solve that conflict. What if he wants parts of Poland?
You leave
next?
out the
What if
most
he
important
wants
part of that deal.
More of Ukraine next.
Aren't
you letting some of these
the most important
authoritarian
part of the
leaders
deal
off
is
the
what
hook?
actually advances? Far from it. I think that the Biden administration is so stubbornly attached to the idea of getting Xi Jinping to drop Vladimir Putin. What I think we need to be doing is get Vladimir Putin to drop Xi Jinping. Just like Nixon went to China in 1972, I think Putin is like the new Mao. I will visit Moscow and I will pull Russia out of its military.
I'm not sure that I would want to be compared to the new Mao. I know what he's going for, but I don't think that it's his best moment in terms of his analogies.
Military alliance with China. The Russia-China military alliance is the single greatest military threat that we face today. Hypersonic missile capabilities, nuclear capabilities in Russia, far ahead of us or China. A naval capacity in China ahead of ours. combined with an economy that we depend on for our modern way of life, those two nations are in a military alliance with one another, and nobody in either political party is talking about it. Worst of all, our engagement in Ukraine is further driving Russia into China's arms. So my foreign policy centers on weakening that alliance. That advances American interests.
But you would let Putin have
that
parts
is how
of
we
Ukraine.
actually secure peace.
But you would let Putin have parts of
I would
Ukraine.
freeze the current lines. I would freeze the current lines of control, and that would leave parts of the Donbass region with Russia. I would also further make a commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. But there are even greater wins that I will get for the United States in return. The top of the list. No, our goal should not be for Putin to lose. Our goal should be for America to win. That's what we have forgotten in this country, is that driving Russia into the ground is not a U.S. strategic goal. A U.S. strategic goal is to secure peace and prosperity for Americans. And so, you know what? I do think many of those military resources being used to protect against an invasion across somebody else's border halfway around the world should be used to protect against the invasion across our own southern border right here at home. And in the meantime, yes, we need to pull Russia apart from China instead of driving Russia further into China's hands. And I think we have a foreign policy establishment in both parties, frankly, Republican Party and Democratic Party alike, that behaves as though we're still in the Cold War of the last century, forgetting that the USSR does not exist anymore and that the real threat we face today is communist China, which is that much stronger when Vladimir Putin is in Xi Jinping's camp.
All right, Vivek Ramaswamy, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
You can understand why on CNN's YouTube page, the first half, when Acosta was prosecuting Trump, wasn't there because Vivek made him look foolish and angry. And what I can tell you is that I think that Vivek is the most articulate politician I've ever seen. I think that Ron DeSantis is very, very articulate as well, but there's nobody that compares to Vivek. He has tremendous command of all subjects, and including the law, including be able to cite case after case. The man is a genius. I have this great campaign slogan if he's running against Joe Biden: from dementia to genius. I think that that's a winner, but that's just me. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section. I think that hopefully I've introduced you to Vivek in such a way and that you appreciate the commentary. So thumb up the video, subscribe, and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Have a fantastic day. Peace out.